Hello, 7th and 8th graders, and welcome back to America Land I Love. We are still in Chapter 22, Troubled Times for America. I do want to remind you that not all of history is depressing and awful. So make sure that you're looking at TV shows or movies from this time to kind of give you a more complete experience of what was going on. We're talking about the Arab oil crisis right now when OPEC basically refused to sell oil to the United States of America because America supported Israel during the Six-Day War, during the Yom Kippur War. Okay, so we are on next note. Come on. There we go. Arab oil embargo. It sent the American economy into a very serious recession because we were not pumping enough oil for ourselves. We were purchasing it from overseas. We had become dependent on overseas oil. So OPEC had raised the price of oil from $2 to $11 a barrel, which is a huge jump. That is the price of crude oil. Then there is the price to be taken into account where it has to be refined so that it can be used as gasoline in cars. If you remember Mrs. Raymond, she taught kindergarten at our school for quite a long time. She was a teenager during the oil embargo, and it was her job to go to take everybody's cars on whatever day of week that they were scheduled to be filled. And that was her whole job during one summer, was to take cars that her family owned to go and get their gas tanks filled. The rest of her family were working all day. So it really became almost an all-day thing to go and fill your car with gas during this oil embargo. Okay, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was created during this time because there was an absolute need to get more oil that was actually drilled in the United States and refined in the United States. It would be less dependent on foreign oil. So the Trans-Alaska Pipeline, Congress permitted several large oil companies to build an 800-mile-long pipeline in 1974. It extended from the North Slope to the southern shore of Alaska, and that cut down the time it would take to drill the oil and then take it by sea all the way around. It also allowed for less opportunity of oil spillage because the pipeline was actually over land and it was easily accessible so that any kind of leak could be fixed. There it is right there. It's quite long, 800 miles long. And that did help to relieve some of that dependence on foreign oil, but unfortunately the United States remained dependent on foreign oil for quite a long time until just last year we ended up becoming the number one. We ended up exporting oil because we were drilling so much, which is a good thing for us. Okay. America's 1970s recession was a result of the oil embargo because oil really drives everything in our economy, from trucks being on the road. That's how our food is delivered to us. Farmers are not able to get trucks to deliver food or to pick up food from farms and deliver it to grocery stores. Anytime the gas price goes up, our food cost goes up, our clothing cost goes up, everything goes up as a result of an oil recession, an oil embargo in this case. So please keep that in mind. We depend on oil, and the more we depend on American oil, the better off we are rather than on foreign oil. We do have plenty of oil reserves. Those who basically are screaming about we are running out of oil, we're running out of oil, we're running out of oil. Their end date for running out of oil is over 100 years from now. So we don't know that we're running out to the point where we don't know for a fact that there's more oil under there. Now, it's a good thing for us to have multiple types of energy sources. That is a good thing. There's nothing wrong with that. But for the most part, even those really good extra energy sources tend to be run by oil. I know that sounds contradictory, but let's talk about it. During this time, during the 70s, the president who was trying to get everybody away from oil and more onto solar was using glass solar panels on the White House. They were not very efficient. He was trying to encourage the rest of Americans to turn to solar for heating their house and heating water. But again, they weren't very efficient. They were incredibly heavy. They are better today, much better, but they are made from oil products. So they're made from petroleum products. And when they are no longer usable, they have to be recycled in a manner that you would recycle toxic materials. So it's not really that much more beneficial. Now, over time and with more private companies investing in things like solar power, we're going to see more and more solar power being helpful and not so expensive. It is very, very expensive right now. I know it sounds like it would be free, but to put all the equipment onto your house and get everything started is incredibly expensive, and it takes years sometimes for you to recoup that investment. But the more that private industry promotes and gets into solar power and trying to make it as cost effective as possible, the better off it will become. Wind power is also extremely, extremely expensive. It costs a lot of money for those windmills to run. And just to get them started requires not wind, it requires oil. Okay. Then there's also places that use steam power, but that is also done by oil. There's also issues where they've discovered when they make these big wind farms and big solar farms that it's actually very, very harmful to the wildlife in the area because birds get cooked as they fly over. It becomes very hot. Okay, so we still need to work on the ideas for extraordinary forms of energy sources. The most efficient is actually nuclear energy, but it requires a great deal of oversight so that there isn't an accident where things become poisoned. Okay, so President Nixon tried to control inflation by freezing wages and prices. That means that even if it's harder for people who are, for instance, the farmers and the marketers, the people who are running supermarkets, if it's becoming more and more expensive for them to grow and buy the food, they cannot raise their prices to the consumer because of that of the freezing of wages and prices. So that means that the people who are providing the food are actually losing money on that. So this was done for a 90-day period, but when controls were lifted, the inflation continued. The effort to end segregation continued well into the 1970s. One controversial way to end segregation in schools involved court-ordered busing of students from one school district to another. It looked good on paper, and it really wasn't all that great for anybody. The idea was this would allow students who were in traditionally Black schools who didn't have a lot of extra curricular things to do, or they didn't have maybe the best teachers or maybe the best supplies. It would allow them to get on a bus and go to a school that did have better teachers, better supplies, more extracurricular activities. So it looked good on paper. It looked like, okay, here, you get a chance to go to this nicer school. The problem was this became court ordered, where it was like, even if the school in your neighborhood is not too far from you, we're going to require that you go to this other school instead. So you had a lot of students who were being bused out of neighborhoods where they had a school, and they would be on the bus for an hour a day each way. That's 2 hours out of your day that you could be doing homework and spending time with your family and getting an after-school job. So that became an issue. It also became an issue with people who had nice schools in their neighborhoods were saying, look, this was paid for by our tax money, so we wanted to keep it exclusive. Well, that's not how public school works. And so they would get angry at kids being bussed in, and those kids would be picked on or bullied by those who lived in their neighborhoods, in the new neighborhoods. So this was an effort to stop something that was really important. I mean, an effort to stop segregation, yay. The way it was done was actually more harmful than beneficial, unfortunately. I think everybody would have been much happier had the schools that were considered to be run down and didn't have the best teachers, the best curriculum, the best opportunities, to have those revamped instead. I'm not against kids going to school in a different neighborhood or coming in from another neighborhood, I don't have a problem with that. Our school is very different because we have people from all over. We have kids coming in from Hemet, from Yucaipa, for a long time from Cabazon when my kids were there, people from Banning and Beaumont. We really, once we're together in our school, we don't care where you came from. And we also don't care what color you are. Couldn't care less. We don't care what your family background is. We just want you there because we want you to learn and learn in an environment that is healthy, one that is kind. We do really work hard to try to make sure we have a kind environment and a Christian environment. And it's not easy because we're all human beings and we all make mistakes. And sometimes it's very difficult for students because they look at school and saying, well, you know what, someone said something kind of mean and nasty about me or to me. And it's like, okay, well, they were using words. We can't really get rid of somebody who's using words unless they're really, rank. But we can't really get rid of somebody for using words. But what we want to do is we want to help that person to start using better words. We want to protect you at the same time. It's really a balancing act. It's a juggling act. And it's hard for everybody because we're all human beings who all have a sin nature and we're all just trying to do the best we can with God's help. The Supreme Court made several what they considered liberal decisions in the early 1970s. For one, they ruled against capital punishment in 1972, meaning that someone who took someone else's life would no longer have to pay for it with their own life. Now, this is, you're talking about people who purposely killed another human being, and there have been witnesses to that. The other thing was they also ruled in favor of abortion in 1973, which is the opposite of capital punishment. It's still a life being taken, but in abortion, the life is completely innocent. They haven't done anything to anyone. For capital punishment, the person who's being executed has committed a very serious crime where they've actually taken someone's life. In abortion, the person who dies is completely innocent. Roe versus Wade legalized abortion. That was the name of the court case in the Supreme Court. And abortion is the killing of babies before birth. Now, the woman whose name was given to this, the Supreme Court case, her name was Norma McCorvey. She was pregnant. She went to her doctor to have an abortion. The doctor refused because it was illegal, except for in cases where if a woman's life was in danger. And she tried to come up with reasons why she should be allowed to have an abortion. Now, she was then approached by the ACLU to go to the Supreme Court and make statements that she should have the right to have an abortion because she had been raped. And according to her, she had been raped by a gang of young Black men. So she was hitting all of the hot spots in the South because she was from Texas. She was hitting all the hot spots. She was hitting racism. She was hitting rape. She was hitting the idea that she shouldn't have to have a baby that was conceived in rape. The truth was, it was all a lie. So Norma McCorvey, the former Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade, she was persuaded by these attorneys to say that she had been raped. She was never raped. She was told to say that it was by a gang of young Black men. That never happened. She was told, she lied and said she needed to have that abortion. She never had an abortion, ever. She ended up giving birth to a little girl, and that little girl was adopted out immediately. So she never really spent any time with that little girl. And then she went and joined the pro-abort group for a very long time, knowing that the whole time she was actually lying about her experience and not feeling good about lying about her experience. And finally, she met with some Bible-believing Christians who witnessed to her. She in turn got saved, and then she came out and she said, okay, I'm going to come clean. I'm going to tell you the truth. Everything that I've said up to this point is a lie. This whole thing with the Supreme Court was me lying on the stand. She committed perjury. So she ended her life, the second part of her life, really pushing for abortion to be overruled, this Roe versus Wade to be overruled, and abortion to be made illegal in the United States. And she very openly spoke about the hurt that she went through, the problems that she went through because of her lies and because of this abortion issue. Many women who have had abortions also have issues with severe depression. There is a chemical imbalance issue there. There's problems with, you have more, you're more likely to have certain kinds of cancer after an abortion. And one of the big issues with abortion is one of the primary side effects of abortion is infertility, which is not really spoken about too much, but I don't know if you've noticed, but infertility is a huge part of American culture now, where women are trying to get pregnant and they're not able to get pregnant. Infertility is one of the big issues with post-abortions. Okay, Senator George McGovern ran against Nixon in 1972. He did not do well. People knew he wasn't going to do well. He had a hard time finding even anybody to be running with him. He carried only one state, and Nixon won by the largest margin ever, despite the fact that he was having problems with his vice president under investigation, and despite the fact that he was still bringing people in from Vietnam, and he had been accused of trying to continue the Vietnam War by going into Cambodia and Laos. But he won. He won by a huge margin, and people were like, wow, he is on top of things, but it wasn't good enough for him. Now, shortly after his reelection, Nixon began to face problems with his administration. Spiro Agnew, his vice president, resigned. He admitted to taking bribes. That is not a good look, people. You can't be doing that. And he was invading his income taxes. Again, not okay. You cannot be a leader in American government and then having one law for the American people and one law for yourself. That makes people very angry, and they will want to vote you out very quickly. So Spiro Agnew was encouraged to resign. Now came the moment where the president needed to find a new running mate. Well, he already had a running mate, sorry. He had to find a new vice president. And so he chose somebody from the Senate, and then the Senate basically had to clear this person and make sure that he was appropriate as a running mate. Or, sorry, I keep saying that. He's not being elected right now. He as a person who would be the next vice president. And that person was going to be Gerald Ford. Now, while this was going on, Star Wars was released. Yes, and it's in your books. So watch Star Wars. Write it down. Write down in your film guide in your book. You have to watch it with your film guide, but because you're watching at home, you get a chance to play it back and forth if you want to. I am not a Star Wars fan, but that's okay. Okay, some of you may watch it and love it, and some of you may be bored to tears. That's okay. Just go ahead and watch it anyway. It's amazing how closely this mirrors the life in the United States at the time it was made. Even though this takes place in the, I think is in the distant past, in a galaxy far, far away, it mirrors the United States so beautifully, and it's worth watching for that point. Okay. By the summer of 1974, President Nixon did something so stupid, it's just mind-boggling. Here is a man who was on top of things. He had a brand new vice president named Gerald Ford, a man that was chosen by the Republican Party and Nixon. Nixon basically said, yeah, okay, I'll take him. Ford didn't really want to be part of Nixon's administration, but he was encouraged to by the Republican Party because they said, well, we'll help you get elected when it's your turn. He's like, okay, but he didn't really like Nixon all that much. He wrote about it much later. He actually interviewed with a man, and this man wrote a book called Tell It After I'm Gone. And so after Ford died, all of this stuff kind of came out, how he really didn't want to be vice president. But during the summer of 1974, President Nixon, and his closest advisors were convicted of criminal charges involving an illegal break-in of the Democratic National Headquarters at the Watergate building in 1972. And this was during Nixon's campaign for re-election. So while he was going through his re-election campaign, he encouraged some of his closest advisors to do a break-in of the Democratic National Headquarters. The reason for it, we found out later, was because Nixon heard that the Democratic National Party was going broke. And that made him all happy deep inside because he was a Republican. But even though he was in the top of the polls, he was going to be reelected at a record-breaking percentage, he still felt the need to break into the Democratic National Headquarters to find out if they were indeed going broke. Yes, they were. But he committed a crime. His closest advisors did this with his okay. Now, he tried to say, well, I can't control what they do. Yes, you can. You're the president, for crying out loud. But more than that, we discovered that he was actually he actually set it up. Okay. So the Watergate affair, this was the break-in of the Watergate building. Nixon claimed he did not know about the break-in, but it was discovered he not only had knowledge of the break-in, but was part of the cover-up as well. Turns out that Nixon had this little bit of paranoia mixed in with his life. He kept a tape recorder that was under his desk that was designed to come on as soon as someone started talking. So everything that was said in the Oval Office was recorded. The Congress demanded the tapes from the time of the Watergate planning to the break-in, and he just refused to give up those tapes. He was required by law to give up those tapes, and he didn't do it and didn't do it and didn't do it. And then finally, he allowed for the tapes to be taken and admitted into evidence, but they discovered that there was a very large section, almost 20 minutes of tape that were erased. So he covered up his involvement in the Watergate affair. Now, he was going through an impeachment process during that time. An impeachment is basically when the president is taken to court in the House of Representatives and then by the Senate. They basically review everything. So he was about to be impeached. He was about to go through this trial with this tape that was erased for about 18 minutes. And so he wanted to avoid impeachment. He didn't want to be an impeached president. And he wanted to avoid possible conviction because if he was removed from office, he could then be tried in a court of law. So he wanted to make sure he could avoid both of those things, and he did it by resigning. He was the only president we've ever had to resign from office, and he resigned on August 9th, 1974. First president to resign from office, only one so far. And of course, Ford would be the next president. And this is when everything starts to really fall apart. Things are falling apart already. This made the entire Republican Party look like idiots because they backed Nixon. He won by a really large margin. And then he did something so ridiculously stupid. With this break-in, there was no need for it at all. There was no need for him to break the law like this, but he just decided he wanted to do it. But then on top of this, on top of people not trusting Nixon because of his involvement, the next president, Gerald R. Ford, who became president upon Nixon's resignation, he immediately pardoned Nixon, which meant that Nixon could never be tried for any crimes he had committed when it came to the Watergate scandal. Now, everybody who worked for him could be tried, and they were tried, and several of them actually went to prison. But Nixon didn't have to be tried. He would not be tried because he was pardoned. He was automatically pardoned for any offenses he might have committed during the Watergate trial. This made people turn completely away from the Republican Party. They no longer trusted, first of all, they didn't trust Nixon, and now they didn't trust Ford, because as far as they were concerned, this was a huge cover-up by the Republican Party to cover up their crimes. And as a result, the next president is going to be a Democrat. The Democrats had taken it on the chin for years. The Republicans got to the top. They were successful. And then all of a sudden, this liar becomes president. And then what he did was covered up by Ford. Because the thought process was, if we get this out of sight altogether, if we pardon Nixon, we don't have to have years and years of newspaper with Nixon on the front page going through these long trials for this criminal offense he committed. Let's just say we're done. We're just going to start from scratch. According to the Washington Post, Ford says Nixon grants Nixon full pardon, says he's suffered enough. He didn't suffer at all. Who are we kidding? But this just totally wrecked any kind of reputation that the Republican Party had at this time. Now, Ford, once he was made president, he wanted to cut back on government spending and social welfare. Congress refused to cooperate, and the economy suffered as a result. But here's the thing, Congress is not going to want to do anything that Ford wants to do because they look at him as a lame duck, meaning he doesn't really have any power. As soon as the next election cycle comes in, they will make sure he gets kicked out, okay, by voting Democrat. They knew that he did not have the backing of the people of the United States because he had pardoned Nixon. Now, he did try a couple of other ways to get people to fight inflation. So this is the WIN campaign against inflation. And it is called Whip Inflation Now with Intelligent Nutrition. Grow Your Own WIN Garden. This goes all the way back to World War II with Victory Gardens. And you could actually buy seeds from the Gardeners Club of America. And the idea was that you were basically trying to take care of yourself because the inflation had caused such a high rise in food costs. In 1975, communists took over all of South Vietnam. There was push to get people out of Vietnam, South Vietnam, especially people in our embassy, but also the people that we had worked with who were like high military leaders in the South Vietnamese army who were being overrun and trying to get them out as well, including that the police chief that we had that picture of where he shot a man in the head. Here are Americans trying to get out of South Vietnam and trying to get into some kind of transport. And it wasn't just Americans, it was South Vietnamese as well. They knew what they were up against with communism and they didn't want to have any part of it. It was just a mess. Here is pictures of people trying to get on board the helicopters and just struggling to get out as quickly as possible. And so many people got left behind from South Korea, and they did whatever they could to get out. Many of them built rafts out of whatever they could find that would float and just took off. They just pushed out into the ocean because they didn't want to be there when the communists took over. There was a terrible bloodbath of communist-inspired murder and torture that followed in the neighboring nation of Cambodia. We've already talked about that quite a bit with the killing fields. The communists soon took over all of Laos as well. This is why we need to study history, so we stop repeating this kind of garbage. Communism is being touted today as an acceptable form of government, and it just isn't. About 130,000 Vietnamese managed to escape communism by fleeing in boats to the United States, where they then came to ports of entry. They didn't sneak past the border. They came to ports of entry and asked specifically for asylum. The face of American towns began to change during the 1970s, so we're getting some of the good stuff too. Chain stores and franchise businesses multiplied across the country. A franchise is basically you are purchasing a store that is owned, that is a chain store. So for instance, people will often talk about, support your local small businesses, your small restaurants. Well, the truth is the local McDonald's is owned by someone who lives in this area. And so that's a small business owner as well. I remember this very well. The the jingle for the Big Mac was huge during the 70s and everybody knew it. And when you went to school, you kind of got, with all your friends, everybody knew this jingle. It was a thing that you had to know. You wanted to know because of your friends. And it was 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun. That was the jingle. It was the ingredients to what makes up a Big Mac. Good stuff. Okay, Sam Goody was a very famous record store. They were starting to sell cassettes during this time, which became a big improvement on the record. Records have come back, and those of us who've kind of lived through this long evolution, some of us just kind of roll our eyes. Some people are like, yeah, I never got rid of my records. I'm awesome. But we went from having reel-to-reel tapes, records at the same time. Reel-to-reel means you had great big tapes that you could listen to. There was an 8-track tape, which was in a cartridge that you could put into your stereo system, but sometimes it would split a song into. So you'd start the song on one track and then would go to the next track, and that was the second half of the song, which was really annoying. But cassettes were very handy, and you could start carrying around like smaller tape recorders and listen to cassettes on that. So it made music a lot more portable. Nobody was walking around with a record player. That just wasn't happening. American Top 40 music on the radio was really huge during this time. And then B. Dalton became one of the big bookstores that came around at this time. And it was really a lot of fun to go in there and just look at all the new books. And paperbacks were really taking over. Okay, let's talk about the franchise. A franchise is a permit to market a product or provide a service in a given area. This is one of the early franchises, Pizza Hut. You could own a Pizza Hut, but you also belonged to the overall company. So you paid to sell pizza at Pizza Hut, and then they would make sure you had all the right ingredients, all of the napkins, the decor, everything that they designed, and you basically just managed it, and you got a cut. Okay. Chain stores such as Kmart, that was one of the first, and then later Walmart became common. So up there you see Kmart in the 1970s. You can tell by the cars and the clothing, but that was the 1970s Kmart. Walton started out as a 5 and 10 cent shop, which is an old way of saying a variety store. That's the original Walton's, and it later became Walmart. Okay. So this is Sam Walton. He was Walmart's founder. He started with one small store in Arkansas, and as the store prospered, he opened others until Walton became one of the wealthiest men in the world. And he said, "It was a real blessing for me to be so green and ignorant, because it was from that experience I learned a lesson which stuck with me through all the years. You can learn from everybody." And then McDonald's, one of the first fast food chains. It is also a franchise that you can actually purchase a franchise and run a McDonald's yourself someday. And that's where we're going to leave off today with number 91, McDonald's, one of the first fast food chains. Okay, so do your homework in your book. Don't worry about sending it to me electronically. What I want you to do from this point out is just go ahead and do these in your book. And then when you're completely done with your book, all the way through, then you can turn your book into the office and I'll grade it on my own. That will take some of that burden away from you and your family, and it'll give me a chance to grade multiple books at the same time. So it'll cut my grading down as well. And then as soon as I'm finished grading everybody's books, I will let you know so that you can go and pick up your graded book from the office. But you have some time. We're still finishing up these chapters. So do a little bit every day, but don't worry about turning it in. You're just going to turn the book all in at the very end. Okay? So I just wanted to make things a little bit easier for you and your family. I know sometimes it's really a struggle to get everybody on the computer and to get everybody over to the school. So I'm trying to make it as convenient as possible for you. Just remember, do a little bit at a time. So you should be up to this section in chapter 22. I believe we're in 22. Just do a little bit every day, just like you do when we're in school together. And I will talk to you later. Have a really good day.